Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro has named new economy and oil ministers as part of a cabinet reshuffle. The country's embroiled in a deep recession with triple-digit inflation. Arabella Munro has more on the new appointments.
This is Ramon Lobo, a legislator for the northwestern state of Merida. He's now the most senior economic authority in the country as both finance minister and vice president of the economy. And he's got quite a job on his hands. There are no official figures for inflation, but the International Monetary Fund has predicted it'll rise to a staggering 1,660% this year. Venezuela also faces a cash crisis, as new notes have been issued to try and keep up with inflation. The biggest, the 20,000 Bolivar bill, is worth less than $5 on the street. Those higher denomination bills didn't turn up when they were supposed to, despite the president announcing he'd pull the formerly biggest note out of circulation with just 72 hours' notice. That led to mass protests and looting. And in some areas on the Colombian border, people can now use the neighboring currency to buy petrol, something locals say is making gasoline even more expensive.
It's a big blow to the money in our pockets. Normally, I would fill a tank of gas with 300 bolivars, and today I paid $33,000 for half a tank.
Around 40% of Venezuelans don't have a bank account, making sorting out the currency confusion an obvious priority for the incoming finance minister. The OPEC countries' financial problems have been exacerbated by a worldwide glut of oil. Oil accounts for around 95% of Venezuela's export earnings and makes up a quarter of its GDP. So the country is desperate to see prices rise. Now, there's a new man for that job too.
I have appointed Comrade Nelson Martinez, chemist, current president of the Venezuelan Oil and Energy Company in the United States.
It's not yet clear what new tactics the new cabinet will adopt, but for ordinary Venezuelans, the economic situation is urgent. Arabella Munro, TRT World.
Well, Professor Ricardo Hausmann joins me now from Harvard University in the United States. Professor Hausmann, thank you for joining us on Money Talks. You're described as one of Venezuela's most eminent economists and by some publications as being in exile. Why is that?
Well, President Maduro doesn't particularly like my opinions, and he lashes out with judicial proceedings for treason and other such accusations.
He's actually called you a financial hitman. How did you earn that honor?
I wrote an op-ed that he didn't like.
And that is...
I suggested that the country might be better off by restructuring its debt.
Right, by which you mean defaulting on its bonds?
Well, you know, restructuring, the country obviously is in no capacity to service, some $10 billion a year in debt service with no market access, with only $25 billion in exports. And as a consequence, the government has had to impose a draconian cut in imports. They cut imports of the private sector last year by 85%. That led to a collapse in the supply of basic inputs and brought production down by something in excess of 15% of GDP. So GDP has fallen by at least 25% or so in the last 3 years. This is the worst recession ever in any Latin American country. So the situation is very dire. It's a direct consequence of them deciding on a particular course of action that involves not fixing the major imbalances on the fiscal side, which is causing this quadruple digit inflation that we just announced, a collapsing oil company where production has gone down by 1.2 million barrels a day since Chavez took over in '99. It's supposedly the country with the largest oil reserves in the world, and it's the only OPEC country that is producing significantly less now than it was 16 years ago when everybody else has increased production. So the whole package, it's trying to live only off of oil, trying to constrain all other economic activities, and then mismanaging oil. So all of that plus controls. There's one official exchange rate at 10 bolivars to the dollar. There's another one at 3,300 bolivars to the dollar. So these distortions, this craziness has caused the economy to simply seize, to freeze, and production to collapse.
Right.
Shortages everywhere. So
yes,
that's
we've seen that. And Professor Hausmann, you mentioned oil.
We're having this conversation.
The biggest foreign currency earner for Venezuela. OPEC has recently announced restricting production should drive prices a little higher. Do you think that's going to be enough to help Venezuela? I don't think, in your opinion, it is.
Well, I mean, the problem is that in the year we just ended, the oil company ran such a big deficit that 88% of the money that the central bank has issued is backed up by a loan it has given to the oil company. So it's not like we think that we live off of oil, but the oil company is living off of the central bank printing money. So the situation is so unbalanced that this slight increase in the price of oil doesn't compensate for the fact that oil production has gone down by something like 15% over the last 12 months. So this is just small details in a sinking ship.
Professor Ricardo Hausmann, we look forward to having you again on Money Talks. But for now, thank you for your analysis.